the sun, love in the moon, where every month is June. A little sun.
Welcome to Those Happy Places, the podcast dedicated to the literary analysis of theme park rides and attractions. I'm Buddy Duquesne.
And I'm Alice White.
And today we're talking about the Haunted Mansion, its unique atmosphere, its use of space and theming, and its storytelling techniques.
But I guess what we should start with, since this is our first episode, is why theme park rides? Buddy, what is your relationship to theme park rides? Why did you decide that we should start this podcast?
Oh my goodness. What a question. I guess you could say that I decided that this podcast absolutely needed to be a thing, the last time I went to Disneyland. And what was happening was I was, walking around, not even near other rides. You know that area, next to Sleeping Beauty's castle, where there's a Snow White, like, diorama, for lack of a better word?
Is it with the wishing well?
Yeah, and the wishing well's right there, right?
Yeah.
So we rounded the corner, and the wishing well was right there, and Aladdin and Jasmine were there, and
Just
they were
hanging
greeting
out?
people. Yeah, they were in their wedding outfits,
Aw.
which I thought was interesting because, like, that's kind of rare, isn't it?
Yeah.
So they're in their wedding outfits, and I was like, "Oh, cool! Here's Alice and Jasmine," and they're like greeting guests and like waving and having a good time. And I looked over at the wishing well, and there was this woman standing there, completely ignoring all of that, with her hands clasped with a coin in them, having a legitimate, I think, almost religious experience, wishing into the wishing well.
Wow.
And I say this not to make light or make fun, but like, that's how important this woman's trip to Disneyland was to her. And she wanted to do this thing that much that she had that quiet moment. And I started to think, like, what makes Disneyland and other theme parks that kind of a place for people? And I guess that got me thinking more and more about how theme parks were that important. And why we
really
needed
cool
to talk about them.
That's extremely cool, and something that we've definitely taken for granted as, like, Southern California natives. We both grew up less than a 30-minute drive away from Disneyland. We've had annual passes our whole life. We used to go to Universal Studios after school sometimes, just for fun.
Yeah, we would drive an hour from our area to Universal Studios to spend 2-3 hours there.
Just to ride the Jurassic Park ride, like, 7 or 8 times in a row. What was our record? 9?
9. And that was in the off season, of course, but you know,
it's the kind of thing that we've always taken for granted. It's something that we just have nearby.
Yeah.
But for some people, this is a real big deal for them.
Yeah, could you imagine, because we kind of have to, or I guess in our current lives we don't really have to, because you live all the way in New York. True. And I live all the way in the Bay Area, California, so it's harder to go there. But
is. I haven't been to a theme park since October, I think, and that was a special occasion.
Right. So you can kind of imagine saving up for a year or years to make this trip to this really important place that means a lot to you because you maybe went when you were a kid, or you've been more recently, but it reminds you of something. And what makes those things tick, I think, or what makes people think that way or act that way, is the attractions. Much more, I think, than, like, the way the Dole Whip tastes, which is very important, but, like...
It is very important. Let's
so
not
important.
Disparage the Dole Whip.
No, we're not disparaging the Dole Whip, but, you know, that's what's so important about it. So...
Right. Yeah, at the end of the day, it's the rides. That's what matters about Disneyland and about Universal Studios or SeaWorld or any of these. I mean, not really SeaWorld, but they're trying. They're trying. They are trying. They're trying. They're doing roller coasters and stuff now. I don't know. But at the end of the day, it's the attractions. It's not the food. It's not the merch. It's the attractions. It's why you're there.
And we both kind of had that magic ruined for us, or not ruined,
Not ruined. I'd say
we
feel
have
back.
had it diluted by working there.
Yes.
And by spending so much time there when we were teenagers. I tell people that it was practically our mall.
It was our mall. We all had passes.
We were such Disney punks. We would just hang around and be like, "You don't want to come down this side street, old man." Yeah.
We used to say to vendors and stuff when they'd ask us if we wanted to buy stuff, we'd say like, "It's okay, we're local." Like, do you remember that? It was ridiculous.
I do remember saying, "Don't hassle me, I'm local."
Don't hassle me, I'm local. Which, to those who don't know us, we've been best friends since we were 12?
So long ago.
So long ago.
What are you now, like 38?
What are you now, like 102?
Okay.
We're in our late 20s now, and we've been friends for so long, and we've gone to theme parks 1,000 times together, and we both went on and got our advanced degrees in. I got mine in literature and then publishing.
And I'm a media studies nerd that way.
And so we take what we know and what we love and a little bit of nostalgia, and we, I don't know, turn it into a podcast.
Yeah, so that's what Those Happy Places is all about.
It's going to be a little scholarly and a little silly, but
mostly silly.
But mostly we're here not to review rides or tell you how we feel about new Disney lands or, expansions to various parks or whatever. We're here to talk about story primarily.
Yeah, the stories that the rides tell, and I can think of no better jumping off point than the story of the Haunted Mansion.
The Haunted Mansion.
I have been thinking about this ride nonstop since we decided to do this episode.
It is so iconic, and it is so good, but it's so simple at the end of it.
Yeah, I mean, it really is kind of just a haunted house, and that's really what the spirit of the ride was when it was being designed. So shall we jump into a little bit of history?
Let's do a little bit of history, but we want to get right into analysis. So
just a little.
If you really want good history of this ride and some really incredible backstory on the design of this ride, there is a episode of the Stuff You Missed in History Class podcast.
Oh yeah.
It was published back in 2013, so you might have to go digging for it. But that's a favorite podcast of ours, and if you want a full history, go there. But we'll give you a brief one here, real quick.
Right. So the Haunted Mansion opened in 1967 after over a decade of work performed by multiple teams of engineers, artists, and writers. It started out as a concept from Walt Disney himself, and he was inspired by real-life haunted attractions, such as the Winchester Mystery House in California. Guests originally would be welcomed by a tour guide who would then guide them from room to room of the mansion, offering tidbits of history, and then the room would sort of come alive and there would be a haunting or some kind of special effect, and then they would move on to the next room. So variations on the early concept do exist, some a little funnier, some a little darker and more grim, but the walking tour concept was basically the whole thing up until the point when they moved into the final design phase and realized that they didn't have the capacity that they were looking for. So they moved it to the now famous or maybe infamous Omnitrack system, which is how we get the Doom buggies that are able to rotate and move from room to room inside the mansion. It's
essentially a giant conveyor belt that brings people from room to room. The Doom buggies are specially designed to shield everything from view except for what the designers want the riders to see, which gives them so much control over the precise story that they want to tell.
Which for this podcast, since we're talking about the story of it, is really important. It's that the designers basically want to show you a series of moments or events that tell you this story, but the story is kind of nebulous, right?
It's extremely nebulous and has sparked, oh my god, so many theories and so many more analyses than we could ever cover in one podcast.
Would you like to jump into one of those?
Well, there's which one do you want me to do?
Well, I was gonna move into the death theory.
Oh boy, the death theory.
Right. Okay.
So, skipping ahead a little bit into the ride, the second to last scene of the ride, your doom buggy takes you through the attic of the house, which is filled with boxes and mementos and pictures belonging to the inhabitants of the home, including the bride, whose name is Constance Hatchaway, as I've learned recently.
That is way too on the nose, by the way.
I know! Constance Hatchaway. Like, what a crazy name for a murderous bride. She's holding a hatchet.
Axe murderer.
She's holding a hatchet, and you pass her, you make this turn. Is the Hatbox Ghost there? You've ridden it more.
The Hatbox Ghost is there.
So you see the Hatbox Ghost, the infamous Hatbox Ghost.
He's the last thing you see before the Doom Buggy travels out the window backwards.
The Doom Buggy turns itself around, and you go down a fairly steep slope.
Yeah, I
mean,
it really
up towards the ceiling.
It really does feel like you're kind of on your back in that moment. Like, I'm not sure about the exact angle.
A little bit, almost always want to take a nap while I'm going down.
Especially if the ride stops there.
Oh, that is so relaxing. And so you go down, and there's all these spooky trees and stuff, and then you straighten up, and you are in the gardens of the ride.
Yeah.
Or in the gardens of the mansion, sorry. And you look around, and there's trees and flower beds and gravestones and most importantly, ghosts.
Yeah.
Look at all these ghosts.
And they're having a party.
And they're having a grand old party, and then you get the song, and then the ride's basically over.
Yeah, and then there's the hitchhiking ghost scene.
Right, the hitchhiking ghost, and then you get a ghost, and then you walk off the ride.
Right.
So that idea, the big theory is that when you turn around and go backwards from the attic to the grounds, that you are dying, that you are either jumping or being thrown out of the window from the attic to the grounds, which is a fall that presumably would kill you, and that's why you're partying with the ghosts in the cemetery.
And now the ghosts are much more solid looking than they looked perhaps like in the dining room. Or they're much more out there than they looked earlier in the ride when they were just kind of suggested. Even
kind of directly interacting with you as far as the hitchhiking ghosts go.
Yeah.
So that theory is pretty sound. It sounds really, really good.
And it's super satisfying, like, as a fan of the ride, to be like, ooh, I'm part of the ride, and I'm becoming a ghost like the other ghosts. But we were talking about this earlier, and something that we really want to draw kind of a line on is what is the text of the ride, what is stated or shown or experienced, and
versus theories and fan concepts and fan art and stuff like that. Basically, what's canon and what's not canon.
Yeah, and the death theory simply is not canon, right?
It's not canon. It's never been explicitly said, hey, now you're dead.
Now you are a ghost too. In fact, I think
the ghost host just says, welcome to the party.
Yeah. Oh, there you are.
Oh, there you are. Welcome to the party. Here's the party. Here's your song. Now take a ghost with you as you go.
Yeah, and the taking of the ghost with you even kind of refutes that death theory, because it's saying you are not a ghost. A ghost is following you, but you're leaving this place, and that's not what living people do.
Well, that's not what dead people don't leave.
Dead people don't leave. Yeah. You leave.
Right. And
you walk out of the crypt at the end. And
you're welcomed back.
Yeah.
They say, hurry back, like, come back.
Hurry back when you die.
when you're dead, come join us.
Bring your death certificate, but you're not dead.
No. It's an awesome theory though. I love it.
I really love it.
It's just not canon. So we're talking about the story and the text of the ride as canon.
So,
and I think we should rewind a little and go back to the very, very beginning of the ride and talk about pre-show.
Right. Okay. So two big concepts that we wanted to cover today about the Haunted Mansion. One was talking about it in context and kind of deconstructing its themes. And the other is talking about how it kind of tells its story in a unique way that is so enduring and that people really love because of its unique storytelling tactics, right?
Right.
And for me, the subject that I really wanted to dive into was pre-show. This idea.
Why don't you tell our listening audience what pre-show is?
Okay, so when you're talking about theme park rides, there's two parts of each ride. Basically, there's the show, and I put show in air quotes, which is excellent radio. So there's the show in air quotes, which is the ride itself. It's generally when you're sitting down, you're buckled in, the movie or the track plays, and you kind of go on your merry way and you experience the show, the ride itself. And that's the main part of the ride. It's where the thrills are experienced. It's where the movement is experienced. And it's really kind of where most of the story is told, right? The pre-show is different. The pre-show exists as part of the lines. It exists as part of safety instructions. It's theme elements in the line, or
cast members
and
how
they're dressed, yeah, for sure, or how they act. It could be entire storylines. For example, to kind of bring up a secondary text or a reference, in the Indiana Jones ride, there is an entire hidden story about Abner Ravenwood, Indiana Jones's mentor, having come to this temple first.
Right.
And there's crates that say, care of Dr. Ravenwood. And
he's got a whole lab set up.
Yeah, he's got these other things in there. And that's all pre-show. It gets you kind of in the mood. Not to mention in that line, there's a very heavy emphasis on theming. It's in a cave, in the temple.
We can talk about Indiana Jones for an hour on its own.
Right, so we don't want to spend too much time on it, but that's all pre-show. That's what we would call the pre-show, and it gets you in the mood. And this is the important part about it, is that it gets you in the mood and starts to immerse you in the world of the ride. So in the case of the Haunted Mansion, the pre-show is really unique, in my opinion, and I'd be happy to argue this with you.
I can argue. I can't argue that it's unique. It is very unique. But your particular interpretation, I will argue with you. But go ahead.
Right. Okay. So my thesis statement is that the official line between show and pre-show of the Haunted Mansion is when you step onto the Doom buggy. When you are sat down and locked in, and that's the very conventional definition of show versus pre-show, right?
Right. Going from walking to riding. Yeah. That's
when the ride begins and you no longer have any agency as far as stopping the ride, getting off the ride, walking away from the ride, looking at anything that they don't want you to look at. You are now on the ride. The show has begun. But, and this is a big but, that might not be where the show really begins. And I think, for me, the show begins when you step into the foyer and the ghost host's narration starts. And there's that classic narration about where hinges creak in doorless chambers. That is the time when ghosts are present, and I am your host, your ghost host. And yes. Part of that, I think, comes down to the history of the ride, because that's when, in the walking tour version of the ride, you might have met your actual living host, who would have kind of jungle cruised you through the rest of the house. And that...
I like the use of Jungle Cruise as a verb.
Oh, yeah. Oh, man. We're going to get all sorts of terms like that going. So
I love it.
He would have moved you, or he or she would have moved you around the house. In the same way that the ghost host does. And that means that the stretching room or the elevator scene, depending on how you want to refer to it, the stretching room is also part of the show because you're kind of locked in, dialed into this world, kind of descending into the story. Literally descending into the story. In the case of Disneyland, at Disney World, it actually stretches. So there's that.
Sorry, is this room actually stretching?
In the case of Walt Disney World, yes it is. Yes, it absolutely is.
It is.
In Disneyland, you are going down a little bit and kind of moving into the show building.
This extremely cool elevator design where they raise the ceiling and lower the floor at the same time. I'm a huge fan.
It's awesome.
Go on.
So, yes. That's all... You might define that traditionally as pre-show, but I think because of how immersive it is and how it's inviting the audience into the show and telling the story of the ghost host who got locked into this chamber with no windows and doors, because of that, it's show. It's important and crucial to the ride itself. It doesn't contain any unnecessary details or safety information. It's themed very, very heavily, like some pre-shows might be, but it ultimately, it's not theming anymore. It's just trying to tell you the story with those candle-holding gargoyles and the stretching paintings and the skeleton hanging from the roof, right? That's all part of the story. Now, you may argue that you kind of go back into pre-show in the gallery, but I would argue that that's all show. Once you're in the show, it's all show. And there's no turning back.
I agree that the elevator is show. And I also, now that you mentioned that the gallery there, I'm going to agree that's also show. Because it's a little, you get to play with it a little. The busts that follow you when you move your head and the paintings that change and stuff. It's still waiting in line, but you are officially no longer looking at what's obviously just a spooky house, and you are now in a, like, this is definitely a haunted house.
Oh yeah. It has...
I'm going to disagree that the foyer is part of the show.
Oh yeah?
I think the foyer is the pre-show.
Okay.
I'm actually, nope, I'm going to take a step further back. I think that you can argue that stepping through the front gate is the pre-show.
Okay.
And I'm saying this because of how, not interactive, but how visual the line waiting for that ride is.
Oh, absolutely.
There's the pet cemetery, there's the mausoleum. At Walt Disney World, Madame Leota's headstone opens her eyes and looks at you. Like, it's extremely cool. And then you step into the foyer and you get an introduction, but that's all still, in my head, that's pre-show. This is like, we're getting ready to go. I think the minute that the lights go completely black and the elevator, you feel the elevator start to move, and even the music changes a little bit, and the ghost host is no longer just saying, "Hi, welcome to the Haunted Mansion," but is telling the story now. I think that's where the show starts. I don't think the foyer.
The show starts during the descent.
Yes.
Okay. Fair enough. And that's what's so cool about pre-show versus show as a concept, especially with Haunted Mansion, is that...
Especially with Disney, really. Disney's so good at blurring that
There's
line.
a reason Disney is not the only topic we'll be covering, but probably the main topic, is because they have this down to a science that nobody else has touched in terms...
Oh my gosh.
In terms of how good it is.
We need a whole episode on Universal Studios and their spacing problem. But
we'll get there.
But Disney is so good at blurring every line between, are you actually on a ride? Are you just watching a show? Are you involved and personally in the story
are
itself
you the
when they have
hero
the characters
of the story? Are you involved in making the story happen? And these are really big questions that I think are better saved for later episodes.
Yeah, we have so much content to cover. So let's once again rewind back to the Haunted Mansion.
Okay, so we're talking about the Haunted Mansion in terms of the story that it does tell. So it tells the story of this mansion in New Orleans, and it is pronounced New Orleans.
Sorry, say that
this
again.
mansion in New Orleans. How do you pronounce it?
New Orleans.
Okay, well, the train conductor recording at Disneyland pronounces it New Orleans.
With stops at New Orleans Square, Mickey's Toontown. Yes,
very important that we call it that.
So all right, fine. Stops at New Orleans
because
Square.
It's not New Orleans. It's New Orleans. It's a different place, actually.
It's kind of a fantasized, like, a saturated version of the New Orleans that we know.
So it's this haunted house in New Orleans that's very visibly spooky on the outside. That you kind of approach through the front gate, and there's this really morbid pet cemetery that's full of jokes for some reason.
And Mr. Toad, which is so sad. Because we know he went to hell.
And they even have a grave for their dog that's like, he was our friend till the end. And like, oh man. And the bat, which is upside down, and that's cute. And then there's human graves as well in the back, so you only really see that when the line is longer.
And most of them are named after Imagineers and people who worked on the ride and who worked
and there are also puns. like
lots
I am mortal. Which is really great. So you walk through that, you step into the foyer, the ghost host introduces you to the Haunted Mansion. A door mysteriously opens and you walk into the stretching room, which has no door, you realize upon being in there. The ghost host says that he died to escape, and shows you that's what he did.
So you can assume then that he's... Oh, no, sorry. Further in the story, you kind of put together that the host and the man who died was the owner of the mansion.
Or that... At the very least, he's in charge in some way, or maybe some kind of a butler. So he then opens a door for you, a way out, and you're in the gallery. You walk through the gallery, the paintings change, the heads follow you. It is officially moved into straight up Creepy Town. You board the Doom Buggy, and you go through the rest of the mansion while the host kind of narrates and tells you about, what's happening while you're there. So he explains that it's a very unlivable situation, which they love. And then Madame Leota kind of awakens the rest of the house's spirits.
I'd like to jump there. Madame Leota, who is the very, very physical definition of the archetype of the crone, who's one of a handful of female archetypes in storytelling. The crone is typically an older woman, but definitely a spooky woman who knows more than she lets on, telling you, we're contacting the spirits, indicate your presence by ringing a bell, look at these tarot cards, and she's got all of this like lace and velvet around her. And it's worth noting that up until that point, you don't actually see a ghost.
You see the suggestions of ghosts. You see haunting.
You see a door that looks like it's breathing. You see a candle or a candelabra really floating on its own down the endless hallway. And as nicknamed, I think, by fans, the endless hallway, and then the clock that says 13, all the spooky stuff. But you meet Leota, this disembodied head in a crystal ball, and she shows you the first ghosts that you see.
And after that point, you go to the swinging wake, right? So that's when there are really like physically manifested ghosts, and then you go into the attic, you see the creepy stuff, you see Constance Hatchworth? Hatchaway. And she's like, I killed all my husbands.
I know, it's so... yeah, and she disappears and reappears, the hatchet disappears in her hand and comes back, and it's very, very creepy. And all of the portraits in the attic of her husbands, their heads disappear a little at a time.
That's really cool.
Like...
That's a really cool effect.
It's very cool.
And then there's the Hatbox Ghost, who, with his moving head, may be interpreted to be one of Constance's husbands, though that's never said.
Because it's never stated outright. That's, again, the difference between canon and not canon, is that, yes, he is missing his head. However, it could be anybody.
Any connection that you make there is your own. Unlike the portraits of the husbands with Constance losing their heads, being telling a very clear story.
But there is there is a strong prevailing opinion that he is not only one of Constance's husbands, having lost his head, but the owner of the home.
Oh, so maybe he's the host.
Yes, but the ghost host shows us a hanging body rather than which could be his own body, or it could just be, oh, there's always my way. Look, death or suicide,
which is another thing that maybe needs to be addressed about the Haunted Mansion.
It's very dark,
and that's that's interesting, right? It's super dark and yet kind of joyous. So. As you move into the graveyard, and there was the swinging wake, which was already a party, the party kind of moves out into the graveyard, and everybody's having a good time singing Grim Grinning Ghosts. And then Ghost follows you home, and the ride is over. And it doesn't feel like a downer ending.
No, and here's why.
I am so ready for your pet topic this week.
I would like to tell you about jazz funerals.
I'm really excited for your take on this.
There's a handful of things that I want to talk about this episode, but a big one tonight is jazz funerals. A jazz funeral is a traditional celebration, and I'm not even going to say, for lack of a better term, that's what it is. It's a celebration in traditional, like, New Orleans area, like Bayou, Louisiana. Lots of that kind of culture down there. A jazz funeral is a funeral procession that follows a coffin to its final resting place and is accompanied by mournful music from a live band. Typically a couple of trumpets and a trombone, and this people dressed in all white. It's playing mournful, sad funeral music. But as soon as the body is placed into the ground, as soon as the coffin is lowered into the dirt, the music turns celebratory and triumphant. They play things like When the Saints Go Marching In and all of these like party tunes on these jazz instruments. It's a celebration of a person's life. Like, you're not allowed to cry after that point. That's the end. You celebrate. And the ending of the Haunted Mansion is you walk up that conveyor belt, you walk back out into the light, and you've been in the dark it's a 6-minute ride, not including
the pre-show or show, depending on how you look at it.
Or the show. Not including from the minute that you get on the dune buggy to the minute you walk off the dune buggy, it's 6 minutes. That doesn't include any other elevator or anything. So you've been underground and in the dark for a really long time. You step out into that light, and suddenly you're back at Disneyland. And more often than not, if you turn immediately to your right and look out towards Pirates of the Caribbean, there's a big old jazz band playing music right there.
Oh, yeah.
If you subscribe to the death theory, this is your jazz funeral. You've just died, basically, and you've come out into your own funeral.
That's really an incredible connection that I never really made.
If you don't subscribe to the death theory, then it's a little bit like it's this weird like dissonance. You're like, I just watched this like really crazy, intense like thing about death and there's more than one suicide and like, I don't know, like, and then suddenly that's bright and shiny in Disney again. Like that sort of darkness versus light is so unique. There's not really another ride in Disneyland that does that.
Maybe not a ride anywhere at all. I mean, other haunted attractions kind of rely on you leaving feeling super spooked out. Like they want you to believe it was real, that you really experienced a haunting, where Disneyland has no such priority. It's designed to be atmospheric and to remind you of hauntings and the imagery of being haunted, but it kind of delivers in a different way. It's like you saw something that was way more real than those fake real things. You saw like real ghosts singing, but they're not upset about it. They're like kind of having a good time with being dead.
They're like, this just kind of happens. And what Disney instead wants you to take from it, and in a little bit more of a cynical tone, is a little bit more of them on the merchandise.
Are you ready to talk about the merchandise cart right outside of the crib?
I thought that was a pretty good segue. So like, aside from the rest of Disneyland, which is pretty heavily marketed towards like little kids, especially little boy. No, I'd say little boys and little girls in the traditional gender sense.
Kind of the princesses versus cowboys or pirates line that you might draw.
Sure. Which that's
its own
another
topic for
too.
sure.
But Haunted Mansion is different. And Buddy can tell you why.
Yeah, so I very recently went to Disneyland and rode Haunted Mansion. It was one of my priorities. And as I walked out, I was thinking, I should get some sweet merch to commemorate this experience. And one of the things that was hanging on the cart was an apron that had the print that the cast members wear. And it was a little lacy and a little frilly, and it has a name tag on it that says Ghost Host. But in my house, I am the person that does the dishes. And I like to wear an apron so my shirt doesn't get wet. I don't know about, most dishwashing people.
No, that's very,
for sure.
very practical.
And I was like, I could use a new apron. And then I realized that this is a very feminine object. And not that made me want to buy it less. What made me want to buy it less was that it was, $50 for an apron. But I thought to myself,
but so much of their merch is feminine.
You were talking about a friend of yours who...
Yeah, my buddy Lizzie, who bought a really, really nice purse that is printed with the print of the wallpaper from inside the Haunted Mansion. That like kind of, it almost looks like a fleur-de-lis, but it's like this kind of, which would make sense
in New Orleans.
New Orleans, like French inspired. But it's this gorgeous like Dooney and Burke purse with the print on it, and she wears it with like every outfit. So it's like one of those Disney merch that you can make work for your day-to-day kind of thing. But there's so much like that. It's not just the purse, but like countless other pieces of merch with not just the wallpaper print, but like Constance is Constance Hatchaway. She's a doll. Like you can get so much of this merch that is typically
not to mention the prominent role of Madame Leota in all of this as a very powerful feminine figure, where the masculine figures are dead or have been killed, right, by Constance. And that's really, really interesting. And then to say that so much of the merchandise surrounding the Haunted Mansion is kind of caught up in this idea of almost domesticity and homemaking.
It's a home. It's a mansion.
It is still a home, so it's a place that needs taking care of, and you too can have the wallpaper that makes it such a pretty home.
Yeah, it's coded so feminine, and even the story itself, and like typical. This is my other pet topic tonight. If we're just gonna dive right into it, my I was thinking about it, and I wrote like a 2,000 word essay in preparation for for recording this that I'm not going to read to you. But so much of the Haunted Mansion is coded feminine. So much of death in our culture is coded feminine. Not just our culture, but cultures around the world. I already said that Madame Leota is the crone. She is, you know, the feminine archetype of this older woman. This but the things that she's surrounded by with the velvet and the lace and everything and the dead flowers, and flowers are
and they're
so
everywhere
feminine.
around the Haunted Mansion.
And they're everywhere, and they're mostly dead.
Or they appear dead. I think they're like very well taken care of dead. To appear that dead.
Yeah, they do.
Yes.
Disney's very good. Flowers bring beauty and softness to this hard, inevitable truth of death. You know, and flowers are so common at every funeral, and in so many cultures around the world, mourning, they act not good mourning, but mourning is traditionally done by women with wailing and crying, and sometimes for days on end. And there's so many cultures that rely on wailing, mourning women. And women are expected to bear this cultural burden, to be the ones that not just plan the funerals, but act as caregiver, that I have to be strong for my family, or if their job is to sit there and make a ton of noise for like a week or something. There's at least one culture where women have to just cry loudly for days to signify that the family's in mourning. And so the audience on the Haunted Mansion is constantly surrounded by reminders of this femininity, with the flowers and the all the art features different women in either dead or in perilous situations, like the girl on the tightrope above the alligators and stuff like that, and then there's the Constance herself, this
usher of death. Wedding... this one who brings death, and Leota the conduit to death.
Yeah, everything is feminine. And then when you leave, there's a soft female voice, which I think is the same voice actress as the woman who plays Madame Leota, but it doesn't sound like Madame Leota. It's a soft female voice. Hurry back. Hurry back. She's this kind, sweet, feminine voice that's kind of softens a little bit that exit we were talking about, that exit between this dark, kind of grim ride into this brightness for your jazz funeral. She tells you to come back, and she says, hurry back. She's either saying hurry back to the ride or come back to death, depending on how you read your fall or whatever. And then it's just, it is, the whole ride is so feminine. There's those three distinct feminine features of the ride, and then all of the imagery surrounding it. This well-kept Southern home, and all the merch and stuff. It's fascinating to me how it's so feminine, especially like feminine coded towards like not older women, but not children. It's a children's ride. You can definitely take your kids on it if they're okay with being spooked, but they somehow the fans of the ride became like 20 something to 30 something year old women, which no other ride in Disneyland has the same demographic.
Definitely not as recognized of a demographic, I guess, if that makes sense. Like as recognized as the key demographic, and kind of had the merch pointed at them that way.
Sure. I mean, we're all big Star Wars fans, but everybody gets a Star Wars t-shirt. Like in the Star Wars shop. The Haunted Mansion stuff is very feminine.
Yeah, for sure. So at the end of all of this, I think what makes the Haunted Mansion such a prevailingly popular ride is its really, really deep sense of atmosphere that doesn't put on any airs of being unreal or being exciting or being thrilling. It's this kind of slow, contemplative look at a certain way to view mortality. And that comes from its history and the way audiences experience it, and from the story that it tells, as well as its surrounding connection to the park. And when we talk about all of these things together, that's kind of why we thought, let's dedicate an episode of the podcast, especially our first episode, to this incredible attraction that serves kind of as an example for others to live up to. Thank you for listening to Those Happy Places. I'm Buddy Duquesne.
And I'm Alice White.
The research for this episode was done by Buddy Duquesne and edited by Alice White.
This episode was edited by Buddy Duquesne and produced by Alice White.
Our theme music is Golden Gate by the California Feetwarmers, featuring Phil Alvin. Find the Feetwarmers on YouTube or on their website, californiafeetwarmers.com.
And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and tell your friends. Send people to our website at www.thosehappyplaces.com and join us on our Facebook page at facebook.com/thosehappyplaces, where we're always talking about theme parks and ideas for future episodes. We're also on Twitter.
That's right, I'm at Buddy_Duquesne. Duquesne is spelled Duquesne.
And I'm at Alice White, THP, for Those Happy Places.
Thanks for listening, and we hope you return to those happy places.